Russians started 5 more assaults, 5 more offensives in the area of Toretsk. They had tactical success. Also, they escalate, activate their efforts towards Kramatorsk, Chasiv Yar. In those areas, I believe that we will see most of the action. But again, according to our guys, they have, this impression that Russians bet everything on the upcoming 2-3 months, and they formed several offensive groups and tried to use them to gain success in Donetsk region. So apparently, we will see a lot of action in those areas. It's Chasiv Yar, it's Toretsk, Vovchansk not so much, because Kharkiv offensive stalled. It collapsed basically. It's very, very hard to take control over a major city, which Russia failed during these 2 years. Just to remind our viewers, there are 22 major cities in Ukraine under Ukrainian control, and it was like that since 2014. Since 2014, despite all their efforts, Russians didn't manage to take control over any of the major cities. Kherson was taken initially, but they lost it. And currently, they don't control any of those cities that were under Ukrainian control. I'm talking about major cities, regional centers that were under Ukrainian control in 2014.
It's really interesting. You mentioned how, the next 2 or 3 months you think is going to be crucial, and that's potentially when Russia is going to launch a fresh offensive. I suppose that begs the question whether the full effect of the US military aid will have been delivered in time to help defend against that offensive and indeed to launch potential counterattacks and strikes inside Russian territory. How do you assess that at the moment, Operator Starsky, in terms of the delivery of the US aid?
I estimate that most of the promised munitions will be delivered very, very soon in the upcoming months. And of course, Russians also anticipate arrival of F-16 jet fighters. So they realize that this situation is very, very dangerous. And again, they will concentrate majority of their efforts around Donetsk Oblast. I believe that we will see a lot of combat there very, very soon.
In recent days, Ukraine has struck Russian oil depots in Rostov Oblast and also Krasnodar Krai using domestically produced Neptune missiles. Now, obviously, those sites are within the range of US-provided ATACMS, but Ukraine isn't allowed to use the ATACMS in those territories because of the restrictions that the US has placed on where Ukraine can use its weapons. Obviously, they have moved on that issue, and they have now allowed Ukraine to use American-supplied weapons to hit targets inside Russia. But still with those limitations, how frustrating are those limitations still? And do you have any optimism that America at some point will make a further concession and allow Ukraine to use US-supplied weapons in more parts of Russia?
The frustration is present to some extent, of course, because even considering that we are allowed to use Western munitions to strike Russian military targets on the Russian territory, but again, we're talking about the close rear, so to say. It's approximately 40-50 kilometers deep into the Russian territory. Unfortunately, we require much munitions with much longer range, like ATACMS, to strike important targets. Plus, we have full intel on those targets at this point. But unfortunately, it's impossible. That's why we keep using Ukrainian-produced drones. We keep using Ukrainian-produced missiles as well. As for Neptune, this missile has been modified. Again, just to remind our viewers, Russian flagship Moskva 2 years ago was destroyed using just 2 of those missiles. We know that they are being modified. We're talking about increased range, increased warhead. But until we are given the green light to strike Russian strategic objects deep in their rear, in their operator rear, we will have to deal with increased amount of Russian invaders here on the ground. And this is very dangerous because we cannot use those missiles to eliminate Russian personnel. They're not supposed to be used like that. We are talking about destroying Russian ammunition storages and fuel storages. Currently, we don't have enough potential to do that effectively. But I hope that things will change because, again, as we can see, the support for Ukraine is only growing. More and more countries agree to support Ukraine in our fight against the Russian aggression. So I have hope that this will change as well. There's no other way. Russians introduce measures to intercept our drones. We have to introduce measures to, evade Russian air defense. And judging from, all those burning oil refineries on the Russian territory, and not only refineries, multiple military objects, headquarters for the Russian intelligence, and things like that. We can say that our drones are being modified as well. And another thing I want to mention is that currently we can witness increased amount of those drones being launched at Russian military targets. First of all, because of the help from our allies. We received quite a few supplies from our friends who support us. And also we managed to increase production of long-range drones. And it's only beginning. So I believe that we will see even more Ukrainian flying objects flying into the Russian territory.
You are, of course, the co-founder of the Propaganda Study Institute, monitoring some of the messaging coming out of the Kremlin. What is the latest you're hearing there? What are the latest propaganda lines that the Russians are trying to push?
That Russia is not our enemy, and this is something they were pushing intensively, I believe, for the recent 2 or 3 months. Russia is not our enemy. Iran, Syria, North Korea, China, they're not our enemies. They're good guys, and we are the bad guys. Unfortunately, because Russians are so effective in creating propaganda and they exploit freedom of speech on the West. Instead of discussing how to solve the situation, we're discussing, the general public, we're discussing whether these things are true or not, whether the facts are true or not. And this is something that Russians are very, very effective at doing. They distort reality so much so people start thinking that indeed Ukrainian soldiers hit Ukrainian cities, kill Ukrainian people, because this is what we do. Whenever Russia attacks, we always have, those suicidal tendencies waking up inside of our heads for no reason. This is something very dangerous, and hopefully governments will pay more attention to this threat. There's already some success regarding fighting Russian propaganda among our allies. Baltic countries, Poland, they already have quite some results. They have different TV shows debunking Russian misinformation. And I believe this is one of the best ways to destroy Russian propaganda, by exposing it and explaining how it works.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask you that, how you think what you think is the best way of dealing with Russian propaganda, and you think it is taking it head on and addressing the claims? Because some say ignore it, because if you tackle the claims head on, you are amplifying it and you're drawing more attention. But do you think you need to address the claims and debunk them almost to disprove them?
Yes, absolutely. Because again, there are people invulnerable to the Russian propaganda, of course, but those people are not their target audience. Russian propaganda targets specific audience that is most susceptible to the Russian propaganda, and we have to work with those people because those people, one way or another, are decision makers. We live in a democratic society, and this is how democracy works. Russians know it perfectly, and Russians perfectly know how to exploit it.
Turning back to the situation on the front line, when do you think Ukraine may be in a position to launch a fresh counteroffensive?
It's very, very early to talk about it right now. I believe currently what we see on the front line is called active defense. But I believe that as soon as we have enough munitions that will let us eliminate Russian personnel in the most effective way possible, as soon as we have enough measures to suppress Russian artillery and to demine the minefields, because Ukraine is currently the most mined country in the world. Probably then we will be able to talk about the counteroffensive. But again, no matter what happens, Ukrainians will never trade their territories. We will keep fighting for our land, for our homes, and we will be returning our borders of 1991. Even though it seems hard to some people, it may seem impossible. But Russians lost the war in Afghanistan, which is one of the examples, and they will lose the war in Ukraine.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on global security and the war in Ukraine, you can listen to Times Radio, take out a digital subscription to the Times, and click subscribe on our YouTube channel.